Hello, thank you for tuning in. Welcome to our, I guess officially the third video with Daniel and I exploring eidetic eduction. Such a rich thing. I love this conversation. We continue where we left off in the last video of going back and forth between discussing pulling up and discussing Daniel's conversation with John and going into conversation. And I really felt this particular dialogue in many ways was a felt sense of what we were talking about. And I think Daniel would agree, in many moments was what was doing the talking, genuine dialogos. So this, and we didn't get that far into the video because it's so rich. We're going to continue with this, but thank you for watching. Keep your ears tuned for the next one coming out. Housekeeping. Okay, so we've got clear on the date for the next Dialogos Circling workshop taught by myself, Chris Masiatro, and John Vervaeke. It's going to be February 19th and 20th. That's February 19th and 20th for the Dialogos Circling course. First one totally came off beyond our expectations. This one should even be better, I'm thinking, and more refined. I don't have a place for you to register for it right now, but we got the date set, so I want to go ahead and put those in your calendar. The last one had about, I think, 80 people in it. You can take it twice, right? A lot of people want to take it again. That's fine. But I will get you all the links and information when I have them on where you can pay and all the details. Also, if you are interested in working one-on-one with me in consulting, coaching, relationship, I am taking clients. Email me. My email's below. Circling, which I actually talk extensively about in relationship to this conversation, especially. If you're interested in exploring that, we have a weekend coming up in 2 or 3 weeks. We have a Thursday open event, open to everybody, 6 to 9 Pacific Standard Time. And we have the Art of Circling course, and much, much more coming up. So all the links for that are below. Have a great day. Thank you. All right, we just heard that Orwellian voice letting us know that we are being listened to and recorded. Welcome back, my friend.
Yeah, welcome, Guy, and welcome to the Overlord of Zoom.
Exactly. So I've been excited to continue this conversation. So we're going to, in some sense, pick up where we left off, right? Talking about this notion. It's an ancient notion, but John is, I think, bringing in a few things that he wants to, you could say, salvage and, in some sense, recreate and create newly around the notion of the Platonic forms, otherwise known as the eidos, and what he's calling eidetic deduction, eduction, right? And in roughly speaking, eduction, to educe something, right? In some sense, it's to draw something out, so, right? To educe. So the eidetic deduction is some relationship with the eidos, right? In the way it's eidoseeing, educing, right? Itself in some way, right? And in the way that it does this in multiple levels, and specifically in dialogos, how it does that times 10, right? And it's a way of understanding that. And it's also a way, and this was really big for me because this is one of the things I think he talked about. I think it was your video that he talked about this, but this was a big deal for me. Is that to clear up some of the habits that we've gotten around talking about Plato, right? Where we usually, when we think of the word, the Platonic forms, right? That we usually think of, like, I know for me, a shape would come into mind, right? Like a shape of something, right? But form does not necessarily mean shape. And I think John's argument is specifically when it comes to Plato, he is not fundamentally getting at a entity or anything shape solid-like, right? And so if you could just start from there as we're talking about this, that when you think about the eidos, or you think about the deeper eidetic form of something, if you notice that you think shape and then you suspend that for a moment, right? Something else starts to really show itself. And I think that showing that something else is what this conversation is really about, right? Yeah.
That was a good introduction.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you.
So I read a paper by Ivo, a German paper, as kind of preparation for this. Right, eidos is the look.
Yeah,
and
the look of something.
And in this paper, Ivo makes he makes the example of a doctor. Kind of you go to the doctor and you see a doctor at work. And then he says, kind of like, we all know what it's like to have a doctor around, caring for you, holding you in times of sickness. But yet, like, right, that when we then talk about it in more depth, then that whole thing, right, how does a doctor really has to behave? What are the features of a true doctor? It's almost right what Christopher said in the last conversation, right? He brought up that example, let's say, of a theater play. And you have all sorts of ways of behaving in a theater play, right? Just as a doctor, let's say, has multiple inexhaustible ways of behaving like a doctor. But that showing kind of like when we all know, oh, that is really a doctor. Oh, that is really, let's say, Hamlet, or that is really, let's say, a tea master, going back to these examples that we brought up in the last conversation. That grace. So Ivo calls it Gunst in German, which is something like benevolence or grace, which is always unhopeable. That's aletheia. That's the truth of something. And then we can just say it is so. For what that's Ivo's argument. You can just say, okay, it is so. But aletheia is like it's like it just appears, it just comes to us. That aletheatic showing, that other. And he would then, right, Ivo would then with Heidegger make the argument, right, the ones who are really called for responding with gratitude to that grace, that would be the poets, first and foremost. So, right, and maybe you can think of the eidos as this, right, the look of something, right, the look of something just as it is in its truth. And I think that's right, that's what we are getting at, kind of like with the like then in eidetic eduction, this project of you and John.
And by the look of something, you mean, and Ivo's meaning, just like with the doctor, although a doctor does all these different things, and there's kind of an infinite amount of things a doctor can do as a doctor. However, there's that which you can, it comes together as you can identify his doctorhood, even though you can't reduce it down into some particular thing he does.
Yeah.
Right.
And that, right. And then there's, with that, with the revelation, let's say, of the suchness of doctor, then there's also, right, this light of aletheia, which shines light on all these things. And I think that's, in a sense, maybe that's the through line that we were talking about.
Right.
Me and John in our conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's funny because I wasn't expecting this as we were talking about this, but this last weekend we had we did a weekend intensive part of a year-long circling training. So people that are coming in and training to learn how to lead in circles. And to do that is really like, it's really, to lead circles is really out of a way of being. It's a way of being with things in its most essential sense, right? However, to learn it, you have to break things down into these components, right? These practices and things that it's kind of wax on, wax off, right? Like in Karate Kid, you know? And there's this sense, and I haven't thought about this sense of going from becoming something that is an eidos, right? Right. In some sense, you can see it, and for years now, and it is not a linear process at all. It seems like magic when you see it, where somebody goes from kind of stumbling around, not quite knowing what to do with their hands or what to say, or right. It's like when you first drive a car, you know, there's the stick, and then there's the clutch, and then there's the wheel, and they're three separate things. And then but at some point it all comes together. And just like this, you could see people go from trying to learn circling to the form circling happening. And it's like, and it's really strange because it's not like it's not like an addition problem, like 1 + 2 equals, right, equals 3. It's more like they practice these things and something catches. And you can see they're circling, right? You can feel it, you can experience it. It has the look of it. So that's the look of it. But it's interesting to kind of come from the angle of what is it to be, right? A particular eidos, or come to be an eidos, to behave, right? And to have that, our behavior be the look of the eidos.
And right, it's also, it's very strange that we all then kind of like we intuitively know what a doctor is like, what maybe what things are like in their suchness.
Right.
When we experience it once, we know we know how these things should look like. To invoke the look here. And that again, right? That's when just what you described, right? When you say, "Wow, that's circling," right? That would then be something maybe like aletheia.
Yep.
That light in which you then see the true look of circling.
Yes.
Let's say.
Right. And it's that, and it gets into that part where you ask yourself, well, how like a moment ago wasn't circling and now it is. You know, I get these questions as a teacher, and I'm stumped by these questions, right? And I think that stumpedness, in some sense, exhibits the phenomena, because it's in some strange aspect, in some sense, if I try to describe that in terms of its aspects, to reduce it down to its aspects, right? That isn't very satisfying, because that's not what it is. It's that which gathers the aspects, right, into a coherent look of circling, right? but one of John's points in this, right, which is he keeps repeating, and it's one of those profound mind stumping things, which is, and that eidos, that through line, is not itself another aspect, right? It's something else, right? And that's the question I'm really left with. What is that something else? And and that starts to lead to, it's interesting. We're on one level, we could say we're talking about these kind of very esoteric kinds of things, but no, this is, if you can identify things, the look of things, like a doctor, right? Like a house, a person. These are all things that you can just look out and somehow grasp them, like in a very ordinary way. What we're talking about is that sense, is the basic way the world is intelligible, and what is it about the world that allows it that it affords it its intelligibility, right? But in the most ordinary way sense, right? But when we start to ask these questions about, well, if it's not another aspect, well, what is it? Well, like in your conversation with John, you end up talking about God, which is really interesting.
Yeah. But right, I mean, we could just, right, we could just talk, maybe this is maybe also from my reading of Io de Gennaro, where we could talk about it in a phenomenological way.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you have this experience, okay, now it's circling, now this practice here that we are doing is confirming to the eidos of circling.
Yeah.
Okay. Or let's say the music piece that I'm just listening, the musical performance that I'm just listening to is confirming to the eidos of that particular music piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe phenomenologically speaking, then we could think about, okay, well, what other things are now flagrant for us? What's coming? What else is going on beyond that? And then, right, we could maybe say, oh, maybe I'm also right. We're coming into right relationship with time and being. That's right. Time and being are somehow connected. maybe they are reciprocally the same also.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. We or maybe, right, we have also something like wonder, right? Then when this happens suddenly, when this confirmation happens, we have wonder. We have something like truth lightening up. Right. We also find deep peace with ourselves. So this kind of, right, this sufficiency that when not right. And we can talk about this, right? Then this mistake of modernity that we think that all these things are resting in themselves in perfect self-identity and self-sufficiency, and not in any relationship to anything else. So, right, that's really the atomistic view of the world.
Yeah.
So that right, that smartphone is like it's on, there's no right there, we are just wills bumping against each other. That's kind of like the modern outlook. Atoms clashing onto each other. Again, right, then if you're, I don't know, we talked about this, if you're a parent and you're holding your child, that idea becomes quite absurd. When you think about it. And things are much more interdependent. And incessantly, reciprocally, mutually connected with and to each other.
Totally. Yeah.
So, and then right, then with that, then we might also, right, ask the same things that Plato asked. Okay, the truth of things is now flagrant. But then again, and that's maybe also for dialogos important, what are maybe the virtues to cultivate this, right? And that's also one thing, right? That with agape or love or compassion, and logos, where they come together in dialogos. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you need them both to I think of this religiously in this more kind of like Neoplatonic sense. I'm, as is Christian Neoplatonism, right? That Nishitani is similar. He also, you can't just talk about intelligibility without love, without compassion, without agape. It's my opinion.
It's almost it's almost like love presupposes the question of truth, right? Like it presupposes the question that draws forward truth or intelligibility, presupposes a kind of love, right? Yeah.
That's I would say, if the truth of something shows up, I would say something like love, or maybe as Ivo says, right, with the poet's gratitude for that grace. I think that's the only appropriate comportment. If it's only the only way to hold open that moreness. Right, you have to love your child in order to see its flourishing into the moreness. And that's we have to do that. Like
And in some sense, this is what in the Neoplatonic Christian tradition, Christianity brought into these Greek ideas, right? Is this sense of, specifically the agapic love, right? As John talks about in his series so profoundly, this way that in some sense you could say I was part of the Christian being able to kind of take over all of Rome in some way, is through this idea of agapic love making persons, right? Whereas, before that in Rome, maybe the persons were the aristocracies or whatever, the leaders, but there were all these levels of people who were slaves who weren't quite people. And then, Jesus comes along, and then the whole Christian tradition comes on board, and has this gaze of agapic love that starts making people. All of a sudden, peoplehood, right, is afforded through this. And in some sense, you can imagine that was part of how how it came into existence. It birthed a certain kind of history, remarkably, or at least was a big part of it. And there's that sense, which I think I was just talking about this beforehand. I'm in the middle of writing a post, like a blog article about this kind of insight I'm getting through having my second child, Teague, who's going on 3 months, of just seeing so profoundly this way in which there is no Teague. There's simply Teague being held, right? And if we just at this state, if we let go of that holding, it would take probably not much more than a day before he would just start to disintegrate into his environment, right? And there's a particular human, and here's the part about this, and this is particularly human in the sense that we start the most vulnerable than any other mammal that we know about in the whole world, right? Because human infants are just pathetically dependent. They're almost nothing, right? They can't do anything for themselves. And so in some sense, family parenting is enacting a kind of womb, right? In which it's amazing that we've figured out how to do that. But there's something about that that utter dependent helplessness and that vulnerability, that when it's held in agapic love, you can start to realize that there's something that somehow it transforms that vulnerability into, well, look who's on top of the food chain. Look who's going to Mars. Look who's thinking about the cosmos, right? There's this deep connection between this vulnerability and what it affords, right? The kind of transcendence that it affords, right? In a certain sense. And but when agapic love is dwelt in properly, right? When it's not there, all that goes away. All that vulnerability becomes a diminishment, right? In some sense. So, but what's interesting about this is that in modern time, right? I think we do definitely have the sense in which, yeah, like we could all understand that the child as parents, we're holding the child, right? And to the degree that we hold him well is to the degree that he will transform into being able to hold himself, right? And as he holds himself, we can hopefully let go, right? As he holds himself. But it's not so obvious, in at least in a felt way, to what degree that while we are parenting, how we are in turn beholden, right? Like we're not just sole proprietorships, right? Kind of holding our child, holding ourselves, right? No, we have a house. The house holds us, right? We live in a neighborhood, in a town that pipes in water, right? And has roads that supply food, and we have friends, and then we have this whole historical social custom that has like passed down century upon century, right? That we're embodying, that's holding us, right? And I think, and for some reason, and I think that we can maybe talk about this, but that sense of, we definitely have this sense of being an adult growing up is we pick ourselves up by the bootstraps, right? We hold our life, we grasp our life, we hold ourselves, right? We think about the sense of that we're holding our world and our life. We even talk about it like that. But very little attention in a felt way reveals the sense in which we are simultaneously beheld, right? We are beholden as we behold. And I think all of those examples substantiates kind of like they're all examples of a deeper pattern, right, of being itself, right? There's this way that being itself has both this deep beholding of itself, right, and beholden of itself, which manifests as all these particular things that we can start to enact. But that relationship, I would say, to this sense in which we are profoundly held, right, is virtually invisible to us. And maybe we could say that shows itself in, like, you know, the environmental issues and in the way that we've unintendedly created things, built things that don't notice the holding that affords us building those things, nor paying attention to those. Like, that's starting to play out big time in the environment and those kinds of things, right?
Yeah. I would maybe also say that, right, we also forget that it's something like death. we forget it, and I will say why. So I will take the notion from the later Heidegger, right? There's the fourfold, and there's earth and sky and mortals and divinities, and they are. He says this in a little bit strange way, but I would say, putting it simply, they are holding each other, in their fourfoldness. Those regions of intelligibility hold each other. So when I, let's say, I go and take a stroll through the fields where I live, then I'm very aware that it's not just me holding myself in this, again, this self-sufficient, isolated, atomistic way, but I'm aware that, okay, the ground that I'm standing on and the firmament above me, those things are holding me.
Yes.
And I'm right. The task of the human being is to recognize this and to be mindful of it.
Yeah.
And not to, right, not to, this is kind of like what the Buddhists always say, right? This trap of the human being to collapse into yourself and to forget about all of this. And then kind of like just fall prey to your own delusions. That's the right. That's the great danger that comes with our creatureliness as human beings.
Right.
And right, that's, I mean, you said it in your words, and that's right. It's this, that we, by beholding something or the world or things are beholding us.
Yeah.
And I mean, what you said is like when you kind of like the way, right, you explained it, right? There's the household, then there's maybe the neighborhood, there's a city, there's a state or whatever. Right? That's kind of like similar to what Jonathan Pashurza says, right? There are all these patterns in the world, and they are all real, and they're really real and holding us. And we can't collapse it just down to something like, I don't know, then maybe just the soul is real and or the mind is real or so. But they're real. They're much larger patterns which we are responding to.
And so in some sense, the educing, right, even right now in this conversation, in some sense we can feel us educing this eidos that not only affords us to see more of what's there and create more, but I would say in this time, the big thing is it affords us to see our indebtedness to it, right? Like this quality, this way in which we don't notice, right, in a felt way, this way in which we are deeply held, right?
And right,
which then of course makes our beholding of everything else from a basis of no awareness of like the hand without any awareness of the arm, right, is going to act really strange, right? It's going to show up in the way that the hand is the hand, right? It'll build things that don't account for the rest of the body, and then we'll end up, with all these environmental catastrophes, right? In some sense, right?
Right, that we couldn't say that has to do maybe with the oblivion of being. We don't, right? We talked about this before we started the conversation. Like, we don't. That's kind of like we don't know what the look of things is any longer. If I don't, right? If I don't know what the look is of, let's say, winter, then how can I realize when suddenly there are no winters anymore?
Right.
If let's say, I don't know, that's always this when reality changes, and suddenly, I don't know, talk with someone else about this, kind of like relationships have changed so much in the last 10 to 20 years. No one takes like we just text each other, and like people struggle with intimacy in ways that all of that, right? And then so when the look of things is not visible any longer, when the truth of things just as they are in their suchness is not realized and felt any longer, then we can't, right? Then we also can't have a real relationship with reality. And we really just live in the world of shadows, and
Yeah,
and
totally.
and that there's the great danger, right? This is then being is withdrawing, being is forgotten, and
Yeah,
then things turn into not so catastrophe.
yeah, yeah. Well, well, you could say that in some sense it'll stop holding us, right? And at least
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
at least in whatever it is that holds us in such a way that arises a human being, that
Mm,
one can have the look of a human
mm.
being, right? Yeah,
I mean, that's also right, and that's what we call the meaning crisis. If that look, that
yeah,
truth doesn't show up any longer, then we are in a meaning crisis.
yeah,
And then then we, that's also what we then need to do. Then this necessity of, let's say, eidetic eduction or dialogos practices, coming into right relationship, maybe also with the philosophers of the past. That
yeah,
again, that then all becomes a very deep necessity,
yeah,
so that we
yeah.
really know the look of things.
Right, right. And this is in some sense, I think one of the things, I mean, I'm wondering about this because we talked about this last time. You know, Heidegger, who both of us have, a lot of familiarity with, if it's possible to be familiar with Heidegger, right? Um, in some sense, he, roughly speaking, talks about the beginning of the end was essentially with Plato, right? And so you can talk, in some sense, this kind of sense where being and beings, right, start to break apart, and there's this difference and all this kind of stuff that is then becomes metaphysics that affords the ability to forget, right, that which holds all of it, being, right, in which he's trying to reawaken. But what I'm finding though is that what we're doing right now is we're actually going back to Plato, but in some sense through the education of Heidegger, and seeing these Platonic ideas through a Heideggerian sensibility, and something else is emerging. We don't see Plato here as the enemy, but I'm starting to see Plato as another beginning. And this is one of the things about Heidegger talks about a lot. And this is always, when I first heard this language, it sounded so esoteric to me. But I think actually part of what we're doing here in this little corner of the internet, and what's drawing or gathering us to have these conversations, right, that seem on some level so kind of strange, right, to most people.
No. No.
But in some sense, Heidegger talks about another beginning, right? This notion of another beginning. The first beginning being with the pre-Socratics, right? Closely related to Plato. And Heidegger goes back, and a big part of his work is going back into the origin, in some sense, of philosophy, and seeing through all of the layers of history and trying to get a sense of the original opening, right, from the Greek sense, and the atmosphere around that was awakened. And at some point, right, you could say that somewhere in that atmosphere, it condenses and consolidates into a particular view or a sense in which then unfolds. And in some sense, I think one of the things that Heidegger is trying to do in his notion of history, the history of metaphysics, is to feel back to that beginning, into the atmosphere from it, and see it in its Greek sense, and begin again, the other beginning, right? In some sense, to begin from it again. And I'm getting I feel like I'm in that trajectory, in some sense, in these conversations of going back and looking at these very old, some would say like dead terms, right? Outlived terms, and finding something generating from them, right? And it's just interesting to me that, like, you know, Heidegger really kind of had such a mixed relationship with Plato, such a critical relationship with Plato. However, through Heidegger, in some sense, affords us to be able to even look at Plato and see him newly, right, in the way that we're talking about it. So I feel indebted to that sensibility and part of what's going on here as well. Would you agree with that?
I think the notion of the other beginning is in so far important, right? As we are in a very different situation than the Greeks have been, right? We are really right, right, because that wonder is just not there anymore, and people also don't realize it. So then again, you can only listen to John's Meaning Crisis series if you really think there is a meaning crisis. If you don't feel and experience that shock that there's no meaning, then why would you listen to something like that, right? Oh, I have Netflix and I busy myself. So, right, the first thing is, right, that's very existential. Yet you have to feel that shock of that. And that's also right. That's also then why it's a different beginning, because we are in this after Nietzsche. We're really in this period of shock. That meaning is and sense is just staying. These things are just staying away. While even for the Greeks, there was just right that moreness shining through. That's a wonder, right? And for us, it's like we don't even realize that it's not there. It's right, as Nietzsche says in that Death of God aphorism, right? This event is still on the way.
Yeah.
It's like he runs, right? His madman runs around through the marketplace and screams at look what's going on, and nobody sees it. And I often, right? It's like few people, of course, see it. But most of the people don't pay attention to it, don't know don't realize it.
Yeah.
So that's, I think that's one main difference, that we're in very, very different situation.
Yeah.
And right, we have to find our own way of talking about these things.
Yeah.
And maybe we can, and we can console, right, the ancients. But we have to do it differently necessarily, just because we're such in a different place.
Right.
Also, right, with technology, with progress, with science, and these things.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm not sure if I wanna say that Plato is the first nihilist. I don't even know if I want to dispense with metaphysics in a sense, because I brought this up in the conversation I had with John, which we might see then now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That there's this trajectory coming from Plato, Neoplatonism, let's say Meister Eckhart, Nicholas of Cusa, and that then coming also through partly through the Orthodox tradition, and now people like John are really interested in Neoplatonism, apophatic theology, and these things. Heidegger's also very influenced by Eckhart, for example. The Kyoto School is very influenced by those traditions. So maybe we can revive, right? We can carry it on.
Yeah.
Then we wouldn't have to say that Plato is the first nihilist, but kind of like, right, it's just the inception of the tradition. Maybe it can go on.
Yeah.
Maybe we can continue it, that metaphysical tradition, and do not have to dispense with it.
Right.
But I don't know that. I also take kind of like the other side seriously, where Heidegger proclaimed the end of philosophy.
Totally, totally. It seems if we did, right, if we could, and if we did, it seems that what I think I find ourselves pulled to do is, there's the Platonic forms and then Plotinus and all the Neoplatonists, which are these kind of systematic, almost, right, treatises of metaphysics, right?
Mm.
It seems that what I sense that we're doing is tuning into that and making sense of the world, right? Making sense of, and in some sense, bringing it into the not the split, Platonic heaven and then the fallen world or something, but like, no, in our fallenness as an organization from within it, that these principles and these ideas have an eidos that we can be in touch with, that isn't somewhere else, but it's right in the very center and source of the world, right? I think my sense is like, that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and right, that's kind of like with the example of the doctor, of the theater play, of the musical performance, of the tea ceremony.
Yes.
Right, then this sudden shining forth of that truth, right? It's so immediate and so direct and so also, right, it touches us in the depths of our being,
right?
When that happens,
right? Right.
So and right, and then that eidetic eduction, right? Then that makes it makes a lot of sense, right?
Makes a lot of sense.
We're going to something that is closer than, it's very close. It's over close. It's very near.
So near.
It's not
so near.
It's
we
not
could
far
almost miss
away.
it, right?
It's not far away.
Yeah.
It's so near that, right, that it's fleeting.
Yeah. Totally. Pause 1 second. My little machine vacuum started on its own. Let me go shut it off. Hang on. So just how about we I'll pull up the video. I'll go ahead and I pulled it back a minute from where we left off. So I'll just press play, and then we can just let me know when you want to pause, and I'll pause, and we can see what we can deduce. One, two, three.
Non-being, the nihilum, or emptiness, or so. So the aspects emerge, and kind of like so you say there's this all the aspects, all let's say the characteristics of the whatness of an object, of myself, form a non-logical identity that isn't in itself higher, that is also kind of like a no thing. There's not an aspect in itself,
but
something, not even something, nothing else, something.
Yes.
And I think, right, we could maybe say this is now maybe the Geist or something like that.
Yes.
It's a kind of like it's a third kind. Maybe we can use that language. Even this is a.
So just for our listeners, the third kind, maybe the third kind that it may be that we're talking about. What are the first two kinds? It's the aspect and the eidos, or the aspects and the through line. Do you remember what the third kind? What were the other two?
Emergence and emanation.
Okay, emergence and emanation, right? And emergence. So emergence, I think about is kind of from below, and emanation is like like the light from above, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
There is, right, so things are emerging, things are forming, right? Things are gathering some way.
Yeah.
But they are not just gathering randomly, but they are constrained in a certain way.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
right, the human being is not just exploding like a whoosh when it's forming, but it's forming into a particular shape.
Yeah. Yeah.
In particular, right? We all know what like a human being should look
Yeah.
like. And in that, the problem is, right, that there needs to be a third kind, something that informs the intelligibility of both those things.
Yes. Yes. That's what you're getting at. Is
That's
this third kind?
there's this. Let's say John White always describes this like this. There's emanation from above. There's emergence from below. But we need a kind of arena, a field, or again that there must be something in the middle that mediates those two.
Yeah. Yeah. What are those? And the third thing would be something like asking the question: what are the constraints that afford those two things coming together in their moreness and suchness? What holds all that together?
Yeah. So something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Insight from Nishida, who was very also interested in kind of like in Plato. Yeah. He thought that there is, right, there's being and non-being, right, and they always oscillate between each other in the hora.
Yeah.
Which was then this kind of like the centerpiece in Nishida's ontology, this receptacle, the place.
Yeah. The Cora.
It's kind of like in what Plato calls it triton-genos, a third kind, something ontologically different from all the other things.
Yes.
And I sometimes think this comes to your relevance realization in any kind of anyways. So
no, that's directly right. I think let's come back to that, because the process of relevance realization, I think, I don't want to say it's reflected, because I'm not trying to speak like a form of Berkeleyan idealism, but there's a mirroring of the way relevance realization is unfolding in a way in which eidetic eduction is disclosing. Yes, I think that's important. But please continue.
Okay, and then right, JP talks then about there's also right the constraint, the one that emanates down.
Yeah, yes.
And that then kind of like I would say constitutes what the Buddhists call first the suchness, although maybe, and then
I tend to think of the moreness and the suchness as directional, and Heraclitus is the way up and the way down are the same way. I think of the way this comes in. So let's use the language of determination the way Pearl does. When you get the determination that gives you a determinate singularity, right, that cannot be captured categorically, that's the suchness. But when you see that suchness, right, in terms of how it, right, proceeds, my language is failing me, into, right, this combinatorial explosiveness of all the possible intelligibilities it can participate in, that's what I think of as the moreness. Did that help, or
let's pause here maybe. Right, there's this
Yep.
What did you take from that? What myself and John just shared?
So a few things. There's this mystery that we can identify something as something, right?
Yeah.
That is what it is, not based on categories, right? It goes beyond its categories, yet it's still something, right? So like for you, I would imagine a person is like that, right? Like there are certain things that I can categorize about you, like you have a body, right? You're from a certain place, right? You speak a certain language. These are kind of categorical things. But yet the way that the particular way that you gather together will continually, if I'm really being with you and open to you, you'll continually outlive those categories or do things that are surprising to me, or go beyond my ability to conceptualize you in some fixed way, right? And so that's, I think, what you guys are starting to deuce out here.
Mm. Yeah, just right. Yeah, that quote from Heraclitus, "The way up and the way down are the same way." That also rings differently, you know,
Yeah.
with the notion of the same, right? That we are always responding to the same. That's always, it's always already there and gathering and skinning at the same time.
Yes.